past weekend in LSU sports, and with that in mind, I'm bringing back my CC's starting five. So here goes number 1. Liberty wide receiver C.J. Daniels announced his commitment to LSU following his visit to Baton Rouge on Saturday. Daniels is one of only 11 players in the nation with more than 1,000 receiving yards and double-digit touchdowns. 2 of those others are LSU's Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., who are both on their way to the NFL. Last week, Coach Kelly announced that Bo Davis, a former LSU All-SEC nose guard, who's considered one of the top defensive line coaches in college football, is leaving Texas, who had one of the top defensive lines this past season, and returning to LSU and will serve as a defensive line coach for the Tigers. New defensive coordinator Blake Baker also hired away Kevin Peoples, another of the country's top defensive line coaches, who was also at Missouri with Baker. So why hire 2 of the best defensive line coaches on their staff? It appears that LSU is sparing no cost in rebuilding its defense. Bo Davis specializes in interior defensive linemen, whereas Kevin Peoples specializes in defensive ends and edge rushers. The next question for head coach Kelly is pointed towards who is going to be LSU's next offensive coordinator. And at number 2, Matt McMahon's LSU Tigers folded under pressure and lost their first SEC game of the season against number 16 ranked Auburn 93-78. Early in the game, LSU's best player, point guard Jalen Cook, scored 7 of his team's first 11 points, but Cook did not score another point and ended up only logging 18 total minutes for the game. LSU turned the ball over 17 times, 16 of which came as a result of steals by Auburn, and LSU gave up 26 points on those turnovers. Before LSU had a chance to regroup, Auburn began the second half riding the wave of another storm it concocted, as it blew out to a 28-point lead, 73-47. With 11 minutes and 37 seconds left in the game, LSU began to cut down on its turnovers and went on a 12-0 run powered by 3-pointers from Tyrell Ward and Trey Hannibal. And with 2 minutes and 12 seconds left in the game, Hannibal hit a pair of free throws that cut Auburn's lead to 8 points, 81-73, but LSU couldn't get any closer. The Tigers are back on the court against Ole Miss, who is also 2-1 in the SEC, this Wednesday at 6 p.m. inside the PMAC and also on the SEC network. And coming at number 3, unranked Auburn, who hadn't won a game in the Southeastern Conference play, ended Kim Mulkey's LSU Tigers' 16-game winning streak, which was the longest in the nation, in a shocking 67-62 upset on Sunday at Neville Arena. Coach Kim Mulkey says that this Auburn's team effort was just better than her own team's. Their energy, their defense, their lateral movements were all strong, and anything LSU tried to do, Auburn responded by making it difficult on the Tigers. The Lady Tigers are back on the court this Thursday night at 7 p.m. against Alabama in Tuscaloosa or on the SEC network. I'll be having a preview of this game later on this week on Tiger Rack Audibles, so stay tuned in for when that gets put out. And at number 4, the LSU Tiger Girls have done it again. The LSU Tiger Girls have won the Division 1A Hip Hop Championship at the ESPN Wide World of Sports Complex at the UDA Nationals and ended up in 3rd place for the Jazz segment. The Tigers won the hip hop division in 2022 by dancing to Like a Boy in reference to the double standard women in sports receive in comparison to men in sports. Their 2024 debut was a tribute to a Michael Jackson song, Smooth Criminal. And number 5, the number 5 ranked LSU Gymnastics team finished up in 2nd place in the Sprouts Collegiate Quad. They lost to the number 1 ranked Oklahoma 197.9 to 197.150. And they beat number 2 ranked Utah, who scored 196.975, and number 12 ranked UCLA, who scored 197.100. LSU started the competition off on beam as junior Alexis Jeffrey led off with a 9.775. Freshman Annie Beard made her debut in the lineup but suffered a fall to score a 9.225. Senior Sierra Ballard went unfazed in the third spot and posted a 9.775, while Bryant followed with a 9.9. Fifth-year senior Kaya Johnson recorded a 9.375 before junior Aaliyah Finnegan anchored with a 9.925 to help the Tigers close the first rotation with a 48.75. This marks the second meet in a row that LSU has struggled on the beam as a team. The Tigers are back in action on Friday, January 19th, as they welcome Kentucky for their first SEC opener in the PMAC at 8 p.m. on the SEC Network. And I know I said starting five, but I've got a bonus for you guys. Coming off LSU's 7th national title in Omaha, the crowds and LSU fans all around are waiting patiently, or should I say impatiently, for the baseball season to start back up. Baseball is officially back starting February 16th, and when the Tigers open up the season against VMI. Last season, fans got to see some star players in Alex Box Stadium: Dylan Cruz, Paul Skeens, Trey Morgan, and Gavin Dugas, along with more of the 2023 roster getting drafted into the major leagues, giving Jay Johnson's 2024 baseball team a fresh start to compete for a national title for the second year in a row. This is Camryn Conner, your host with Tiger Rag Audibles podcast, and after this message from one of our sponsors, I'll be bringing on Kendall Rogers with D1Baseball.com to talk about this 2024 LSU baseball team and the season ahead, along with the news and sports director of the Louisiana Radio Network, Jeff Palermo, and the editor of Tiger Rag, Todd Horn.
The East Baton Rouge Library says this is the year to invest in you. The library brings value by connecting you to information, resources, materials, technology, and experiences. We make a positive difference in your life. All you need is your library card. Stop by one of our 14 locations, open 7 days a week, or find us online at ebrpl.com.
Jeff Palermo along with the editor for Tiger Rag Magazine, Todd Horn, Jackson Blackman, our producer. It's time to talk a little baseball.
Can you believe we're already staring baseball in the face again?
Yes, and especially when you win a national championship. The season goes pretty long nowadays, but we are 38 days away from the season opener for the LSU baseball team when they take on VMI at Alex Box Stadium. And here to talk a little baseball for us, it's Kendall Rogers from D1Baseball.com. How you doing tonight, Kendall?
Man, it's good to hear from you guys. I'll tell you what, you always know it's almost college baseball season when you're getting alerts in your phone about winterizing your house because you're about to get a hard freeze in 4 days. So that's how I know it's college baseball season, is when we're worried about my pipes in my house bursting.
Yeah, it's next weekend, or actually early next week, could be very interesting in these parts as we're looking at potential winter storm and very cold temperatures here. But let's try to warm everybody up and talk a little baseball, Kendall. When you look at this 2024 team that the Tigers are going to have, that Jay Johnson has put together, what stands out to you about this squad?
Well, I think the thing that's really interesting about LSU right now is the fact it's going to be a much different team. I think if you look back at last year, obviously the offense was kind of set in stone in terms of being like a prolific premier offense. And I think this offensive lineup will certainly be fun. I mean, the data is very clear when you look at Jay Johnson. Historically, his offenses are always pretty good. But what I do think, this is an LSU offense that I believe that will be solid to start the year, but will be very, very good at the end of the year. And what I mean by that is when you look at the return of guys like, Tommy White, you look at, Alex Milazzo coming back. I know everybody, kind of knows him for his defensive skill set, but he can certainly hit. Travinsky, Jared Jones, to me, is a guy that I think is going to take a huge step forward. He's going to need to. Without Trey Morgan, he's going to need to have a big year. But I tell you what, the kid that I loved in the fall, when I was in Baton Rouge, and again, I'm not getting even close to comparing him to Dylan Cruz, but he's one of those guys that the first time I saw Dylan as a freshman in a scrimmage, it was like, wow, this guy's really good. And Jake Brown from Lake Charles, I believe he's a Barb kid. He was a guy that when I saw the Purple and Gold series, like from the time he stepped in the box and took his first swing, you kind of sit up in your chair and you're like, wow, this guy's going to be really good. And, he's got a great athletic frame. He can really run. He just runs like a deer around those bases. And he's also got a lot of pop. So, again, I hate to throw a lot of pressure on a freshman, but the LSU fans are going to absolutely love this guy. He has the look of the next kind of great LSU player, in my opinion.
And, Kendall, I understand Jake is slated right now to be the starter in right field as a true freshman.
No doubt. That's not easy to do at a place like LSU. And what's really interesting, I was talking to a couple of coaches from the SEC who, recruited him. Obviously, he's a huge LSU kid. He's going to go to LSU no matter what. But I was talking to a couple of coaches that recruited him out of high school, and they're like, well, that's really interesting you say that because I actually think he could end up being a better pitcher. I'm not so sure LSU is going to pitch him much this year unless they just have to. I know this is music to LSU fans' ears, but I actually think this pitching staff is going to be really deep this year. So I don't think they're going to need him on the mound. But that's something to file away is the fact that coaches actually feel like he may end up being a better pitcher down the road than he is a position player. But, yeah, I'll tell you what, man, he really checks all the boxes for me. The other guy I kind of pinpoint is a big key to the season is Paxton Kling. Again, he was one of those guys that came in last year with really high expectations. And you know what? Didn't play bad, but, was kind of lost in the mix a little bit at times. And so, Paxton Kling for me is probably the X factor. I think if Paxton Kling has a really solid year, I think LSU is going to have a fantastic offensive lineup. I think he's the X factor, and again, keeping on Jake Brown.
Well, you talked about the depth of the pitching and what's anticipated, and I kind of think it's almost a little ironic. If you go back to this time last year, pitching was somewhat of a question mark. Weren't sure who was going to be in the starting rotation. You knew Skeens was going to be good, but of course you didn't know he was going to be as good as he turned out to be. But right now the pitching rotation's pretty much set, from what I understand.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part it is, and the biggest kind of determinant on a pitching staff improving is, where are guys in roles? And I think as you look at LSU the last 2 years, you've seen an evolution of a pitching staff where guys that, at times in the past were starting on Friday nights like last year, were down the line or never really pitched. This year, this is a pitching staff that, they may not have Paul Skeens, but they may not need Paul Skeens. It's a different staff. It's a deeper staff. It's a better staff. And so, I think Thatcher Hurd, I think we all kind of saw what he was, capable of. And then the last year, I thought his stuff down the stretch last season was electric. Gage Jump is certainly a really talented pitcher. He had really high acclaim when he got to UCLA. Obviously, an injury kind of derailed him a little bit. But again, you're talking about a low to mid 90s guy with, excellent stuff. And, you look at the bullpen pieces and, Justin Lore, the transfer out of Xavier, I think is a really kind of funky lefty type who I think is going to have a lot of success because, he may not throw 97, but he's such a different look and he's got a little bit of velocity. Nate Ackenhausen, I thought last year came up big in some, really big situations. And then you look at guys like Cam Johnson. The beautiful thing for Jay this year and pitching coach Nate Yeskie is, Cam Johnson clearly has a huge arm. Cam Johnson clearly will be an instant impact guy. But the beautiful thing about this team is they don't need Cam Johnson to come in and be a world beater. Like they need him to come in and develop. They don't necessarily need him right off the bat. So I think it's kind of a luxury for a kid like that who everybody expects to be a superstar from day one, to have the flexibility to where there's a lot of pieces back, on the mound or added to the mix where they don't necessarily need to throw him in the fire.
So if you had to name 1, 2, 3 right now on the mound, it would be Hurd, Jump, maybe not necessarily in this order, but Hurd, Jump, and you didn't mention Luke Holman.
Yeah, Luke Holman. Yeah, I mean, he's, to me, it all depends on how Jay kind of wants to set up his rotation. But, I mean, Holman, the thing about him that I really liked last year at Bama was, typically excellent command. He's not going to throw 97, but he's going to be 91, 94, very consistent, solid breaking stuff. He had a good summer. To me, I don't know how he wants to set it up. To me, I really like him as like a Sunday guy.
Uh-huh.
Just because, what you see is what you get. And I think if you're, on a Sunday in the SEC, you want a guy in that role that you know exactly where you're going to get out of him.
So let's talk a little bit about the infield because there are some question marks, at least heading into the start of practice from a fan standpoint about what we're going to see there. It doesn't seem to be like too much question from Jay's standpoint. Shortstop, of course, Jordan Thompson's gone. There have been a lot of talk about Michael Braswell.
Yeah.
But there was some question marks about his hitting. What did you see in fall from him?
I definitely saw an improved offensive approach. I saw him quite a bit at South Carolina last year, and I really liked him as a defender. If I'm being honest, I didn't really like him as a hitter. But I thought his approach and his confidence level from an offensive standpoint was much better. I mean, granted, it was a one-day look at him, but it did look better. And, again, I'm a strong believer in what Jay can do with guys from an offensive standpoint. I have no doubt he's going to improve. I think the big thing for LSU is if Michael Braswell can give you 6-7 home runs and he can hit 280 with his defensive skill set, I think you take that. And so I think if you look at him there, obviously second base is rather interesting, with Josh Pearson moving over to second base. I know that's kind of an unorthodox look. But again, it's, Jay's kind of pulling out the Gavin Dugas playbook to where he's kind of, moving an outfielder to second base. Not necessarily, a premier defender, although I would say Gavin got pretty good at it. But, Josh, maybe not necessarily a day one premier defender second, but they kind of want his bat in that lineup. And again, I think the biggest key for me, because catchers are, LSU might be in a better shape behind the plate than anybody in the country. But I think the biggest thing for me is just Jared at first. I mean, if you look back at Trey Morgan, his career might have been way better than people kind of think, just because he was a really, consistent hitter. He didn't necessarily have amazing power, but he was a very consistent hitter. And, we were just talking about this at the ABCA convention over the weekend. If he doesn't make that outrageously good play defensively against Wake Forest, LSU may not win the national championship.
I agree.
I think him offensively and his defensive skills, think of all the times he saved runs for LSU at first base. And that's kind of what Jared's going to have to do over there. He doesn't necessarily need to be Trey, but he's going to have to be solid.
Well, and I'd like to see from just a development standpoint for Jared a little bit more consistency at the plate. He seemed to strike out a lot last year.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely got a hole in his swing. At least he did last year. He hit the ball hard the day I was there this fall in Baton Rouge. But I mean, he's got a huge bat, and the biggest thing for me is I don't like to write guys off after 1 year, because I mean, I can't tell you. I'd be saying names all day long if I said kids that were really good as a freshman, and all of a sudden as a sophomore, or struggled as a freshman, then all of a sudden as a sophomore really turned it on. And I don't know if he's going to hit 360 or Trey hit 340 or something like that last year.
Right.
I don't know if he's going to hit 340, but do I think Jared Jones can hit 305, 310 with 14, 15 jacks? Absolutely.
So is it too early? I mean, you haven't put out your top 25, D1Baseball.com's top 25, I don't think is out yet, but where do you see LSU in the national preview, so to speak, right now?
Yeah, actually, we'll release that next Tuesday, and we were on about a 2-hour-long staff call last night when Michigan got up big. We were like, let's just go ahead and start the rankings discussion. And right now, I mean, LSU is definitely a top 3 team. I think the biggest question is, or top 3 or 4 team. I think the biggest question is, Wake Forest is going to be up there. How do you kind of dissect Arkansas, LSU, Florida? For my money, I feel like LSU and Arkansas is very similar. I feel like they have similar strengths, similar weaknesses. And then you have Florida. They're going to be loaded on, offensively. They got a lot of guys back. I know they lost a couple of pieces on the mound. They've got a lot of guys back from a team that played for a national championship last year. So, short answer: the SEC at the top 6 or 7 teams is going to be very, very good.
Well, yeah, one of your competitors, I guess it's okay to name them. Perfect Game.
Yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah, Perfect Game has 7 SEC.
I used to be there. I like those guys.
Yeah. 7 SEC teams in the top 13, 3 SEC teams in the top 5, and you named all of them, I think. So
yeah, and we have, spoiler alert, but like A&M and Tennessee are both teams that'll be in our top 15 for sure. I really like those clubs this fall. I think that what's interesting about the SEC guys, we can talk all day about the teams that we know or we think are going to be really good, But I think this is a huge year for two clubs in Mississippi State and Ole Miss that won national championships 2 out of the last 3 years. I mean, these are programs that, for Mississippi State, they're going on 2 years, without pretty much doing anything, not making the postseason. If you look at Ole Miss, they didn't make the postseason last year. They didn't make a splash, and so I think for the Magnolia State, I mean, it is imperative for those two teams to make a move this year. And right now, they're way behind some other clubs, in my opinion.
Kendall, can't wait for the start. We're getting there. Thanks a lot, man.
We'll see you in Houston in a few weeks.
Yeah, stay warm here, man.
Got it, brother. Y'all be good. Good talking to you.
It's your time to move things forward. U.S. Army Reserve.
All right, that's it for today's episode. The LSU Tigers are back on the court against Ole Miss this Wednesday at 6 p.m. inside the PMAC and also on the SEC Network. Kim Mulkey's Tigers are going to be back on the court this Thursday night at 7 p.m. against Alabama in Tuscaloosa or on the SEC Network. The Gymnastics squad continues their climb Friday, January 19th as they welcome Kentucky for their SEC opener in the PMAC at 8 p.m. on the SEC Network. Stay tuned into TigerRag.com for more LSU sports-related information, and I'll be back later this week with more LSU sports news.